do me a favour and please wait a while before you start your campaign. Let's please show appreciation to Rihanna. Come on. It would be nice to be able to take a moment to celebrate becoming the first person in British political history to win successive victories over Count Bigface. Believe me, he made me work hard for it. By the way, if you need another reason to love London, Count Bigface easily beat Britain first.
London Mayor Sadiq Khan kicking off his third term today. He's going to pledge to use the next 4 years to make London the best city in the world to grow up. He won a historic third term of office on Saturday, becoming the first London mayor to do so with a majority of some 275,000 over his Conservative rival, Susan Hall. Stay with us here on BBC News.
Hello, at long last, a little bit of welcome news in the forecast for the rest of this week after what has been a particularly wet spell for some southern and eastern areas. The Isle of Portland in Dorset have already exceeded our main rainfall in the first 7 days. Contrast that with Kinloss and the Murray Coast, where we've not seen a drop of rain recorded yet. We'll switch things around a little bit through this week, and where we need a bit of rain, the north and west of Scotland, there will be some at times. Still some dry weather here and warm with the sunshine out later, but where we've seen the wettest conditions, a largely dry picture, only isolated showers and feeling warm as the sunshine develops more widely. And even today, an improving picture. The weather front, which brought the rain in the southeast, is cleared through. One weather front, though, still tangled in across parts of Scotland, producing lots of cloud and a few spots of light rain or drizzle. A few light showers possible across Western England and Wales, but nowhere near as many or as widespread as yesterday, or indeed as heavy. And it does mean that more of you will spend the bulk of the day dry, if not the complete day dry. And temperatures responding into the high teens, if not low 20s. Always cooler where that thicker cloud is in parts of Scotland. That'll be there tonight. Fairly cloudy in Northern Ireland too for a while. A few mist and fog patches possible, but low cloud and sea fog will lap into eastern parts of England and around western coast of Wales, north coast of Devon and Cornwall too, to make for a murky start tomorrow. But temperatures fairly similar to this morning. Now, to go into Wednesday, middle part of the week, that high pressure, which is going to bring the dry conditions, becomes more established to the south and east. Weather fronts, though, scooting round that just to the north and west, which is going to bring some rain later on across the Western Isles, northern and western Scotland, and into the evening, maybe across some parts of Northern Ireland. On the odd isolated shower across some western areas, most places, though, having a dry day on Wednesday, and with a little bit more sunshine around after that murky start. Temperatures will be more widely high teens and low 20s. As you go through into Thursday, overnight patchy rain or drizzle, Northern Ireland clears. Still a bit damp in the far north of Scotland. Many they'll have a dry day. Very few, if any, showers around at all for most of you, and a lot more sunshine. So we could see temperatures by this stage 22 or 23 and creeping into the low 20s in parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland too. And they will climb further as we go through towards the end of the week and into the start of the weekend, with most dry until we see some showers develop on Sunday. Take care.
Today we're looking at the state of British politics.
Asking, is technology ruining football?
Are we too obsessed with our phones?
Helen from Hull wants to know, how hot's the planet going to get?
And we'll explain why prices keep going up and up.
Also, Rach, did you know space has its own smell?
Really? What of? The world is fast-moving and can be confusing.
So let's talk about it.
5 Live Breakfast with Rachel and Rick. Listen on BBC Sounds.
When the weather can't make up its mind, we can help you make up yours. Check on the BBC Weather app.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Vladimir Putin is sworn in as Russia's president for a fifth time, extending his quarter-of-a-century rule over Russia by a further 6 years. Israel takes control of the Gazan side of the Rafah crossing as unofficial ceasefire talks are set to resume in Cairo. Personal information of serving UK military personnel has been compromised in a hack. China is suspected to be behind the attack. And floral extravagance on the red carpet as stars attend the Met Gala in New York. Hello and welcome, I'm Samantha Simmons. President Vladimir Putin has been sworn in for a new 6-year term at a ceremony at the Kremlin. Putin, who's been in power as president or prime minister since 1999, now begins his new mandate more than 2 years after he sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine. In March, Vladimir Putin won a landslide victory in a tightly controlled election from which 2 anti-war candidates were barred on technical grounds. Britain, Canada and most European Union nations decided to boycott the swearing-in, but France said it would send its ambassador. In his address, Putin was unapologetic about invading Ukraine and pledged to continue to uphold Russia's interests.
We will overcome this very difficult period, this turning point period, and we will pursue our long-term plans and priorities. But first of all, we have to save the people of the country. We have to preserve our values and traditions and particularly protect voluntary, non-state and religious organizations and civil society. The measures we take must be targeted and must be realizable. We will be open to cooperation with all countries who see in Russia a honest partner. We will not refuse or reject any kind of dialogue with the Western world. We are determined to parry aggression and to particularly counter those who are aggressive towards our country.
Let's get more now with our Russia editor at BBC Monitoring, Vitaly Shevchenko, who joins me from the newsroom. Vitaly, good to see you. What stood out for you in President Putin's address?
Well, what happened and what was said at the Kremlin this morning may not be what it really seems. The way Vladimir Putin came to power, a lot of people would hesitate to call it an election after all of his key opponents were barred from running. His key political rival, Alexei Navalny, is dead. Freedom of press is gone in Russia. And now when Vladimir Putin read his oath, presidential oath during the ceremony, his right hand was on the Russian constitution, and he pledged to defend the constitution and the rights and freedoms of Russian citizens. But if you open that red book on which Vladimir Putin's hand rested, it lists various freedoms and rights that don't really exist in Russia anymore, such as freedom of thought, freedom of expression, media freedoms. The constitution, the Russian constitution, bans censorship, and under Vladimir Putin's rule, what the constitution says often has very little to do with real life in Russia.
And what sense did you get from his wording about what now for his war on Ukraine, or his special military operation, as he calls it?
He is as defiant as ever. He is firmly in control of pretty much anything that happens in Russia. The message to both the public in Russia and people outside of Russia is that I still want to finish what I started in Ukraine. I want to finish my special military operation, and he claimed that he has the support of the Russian people. But the fact is, whoever challenges the party line, the official thinking coming out of the Kremlin these days, risks being fined at the very least and possibly sent to jail. And as Alexei Navalny found out, death is a possibility as well. So from that point of view, any challenge against Vladimir Putin's thoughts on Ukraine and anything else that matters to him is all but ruled out.
OK, Vitaly, for now, thank you. To the Middle East now, and the Israeli military says its forces have taken control of the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing, which borders Egypt and southern Gaza. These are the latest pictures that show the view at the crossing from on board an Israeli military vehicle. Aid organisations operating there say the flow of aid into the territory through the crossing has stopped. Israel continued to bombard Rafah overnight after rejecting a ceasefire proposal which was put forward by international mediators and agreed by Hamas. Israel says the plan doesn't meet its core demands. Israel is, though, sending a delegation to indirect talks in Cairo. Our Middle East correspondent Yulan Nell has more.
The Israeli army has put out footage that shows these Israeli tanks rolling into this key crossing, the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt. It says it's taken operational control there and it's dealing, it says, with Hamas terrorist infrastructure, to use its language, in that area. It says it's killed 20 Hamas terrorists overnight, and that it has also found 3 tunnel shafts. And it's linking operations around this part of Rafah to the rocket fire that it says came from this area fired by Hamas on Sunday, which killed 4 Israeli soldiers close to the Kerem Shalom crossing, leading to the closure of that important crossing in the south of the Gaza Strip as well. Now, at the moment, when we're taking briefings from the Israeli military, they're stressing that this is a very precise, it's a limited operation. They're not putting a time frame on it. They said, too, that they are working to reopen the Kerem Shalom crossing as security allows.
And tell us more about this potential ceasefire deal, which Hamas said it supports. Israel says it goes a long way from meeting its demands. We understand that unofficial talks are still going to take place today in Cairo. What more do we know about that?
Well, at the moment, this ceasefire deal is really hanging in the balance because of the different positions we had. You know, that declaration from Hamas, it was quite dramatic, saying it agreed to what the mediators had proposed. Israel coming out quickly and denying that this was the proposal that it had signed up to, saying that there were differences from its core demands. But we also have had, confusingly, some officials coming out and saying, no, this is actually very similar to the proposal that was put forward by Israel itself at the end of last month. It does seem really that the fundamental difficulty for Israel is signing up to any kind of phased deal of a ceasefire and hostage release that will ultimately lead to an end to hostilities, an end to this war, before, in the eyes of the Israeli government, it has achieved its war aim of dismantling Hamas in Gaza. It said that is necessary to have a victory in this war.
Yulan now there. Well, let's get more analysis on what's happening in the region with Hassan Al-Hassan, Senior Fellow of Middle East Policy at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, who joins us from Bahrain. Welcome to you. Thank you very much for being with us. We don't know the details of this proposed deal. It's not even clear who put the deal forward that Hamas has agreed to, but Israel says it's far from meeting its demands. But it seems like there is more pressure on Israel and Hamas to agree a deal, but also that they're trying to exert more pressure on each other. What's your analysis of what's going on with this deal?
That's right. We seem to be in a situation where each party is waiting for the other one to blink. So essentially, Hamas, on the one hand, by accepting the deal, has placed Israel under a tremendous amount of pressure, partly because it essentially means that Israel is not not appearing as the constructive player here. I think Israel has had an issue managing its image in those negotiations. About 5-6 days ago, you had Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu come out and say that Israel would march on Rafah, deal or no deal. And obviously, statements like those are not conducive to an agreement. I think it's important to remember that Hamas now, by accepting this deal, is hoping that we'll see enough internal pressure build up on Prime Minister Netanyahu, primarily by families of the hostages and perhaps opposition factions. And we've already heard Yair Lapid, the leader of the Israeli opposition, seem to lend his support for more efforts to arrive at a hostage deal that would allow for these hostages to be released. So Hamas is counting on a buildup of internal pressure within Israel. It's relying and counting on more pressure from the Americans, and we've already seen reports that the US may be freezing shipments on precision munitions to Israel to dissuade Israel from going into Rafah. And then keep in mind that we may see a vote at the UN General Assembly on Friday on Palestinian statehood. And let's just say that given the current circumstances, it's not looking very good for Israel if that vote were to go through. At the same time, I think Israel is also hoping that Hamas will blink by applying more pressure on the group in Rafah, by threatening to wage a large-scale attack, by taking operational control of the Rafah crossing, which means, by the way, that probably very little, if any, humanitarian aid at all is coming in, given that the two main crossings into Gaza are now closed. So it's a situation in which each side is simply waiting for the other to blink.
There are unconfirmed reports that Hamas might be agreeing to a long-term end to hostilities. Given that Hamas is committed to the destruction of Israel, do you believe that that could be the case, that they would agree to possibly in the future just being a political entity?
It's difficult to, I think, project that far into time because we're still in a fast-changing situation. But I think the bottom line, to my mind, is that Hamas would be very unlikely to accept any deal that did not sooner or later involve a permanent ceasefire. Because essentially by giving up the hostages without securing a commitment towards a permanent ceasefire, Hamas would be giving up its main source of leverage, its main bargaining chips, and then only to see Israel, if only a temporary ceasefire were agreed, come back and then seek to destroy it. And by giving up the hostages without a permanent ceasefire in return, essentially Hamas would be removing the main source of political pressure internally within Israel, which is the hostage families, on the Israeli government to bring an end to hostilities. So I think if Hamas were to agree to a deal that did not sooner or later involve a permanent ceasefire, they would be very simply signing their own death warrants.
Hassan Al-Hassan, thank you very much for joining us from Bahrain with your analysis. Well, Louise Wateridge is from the aid organisation UNRWA. I asked her what it's like in Rafah right now.
Yeah, things are very tense here in Rafah. The last 24 hours have been a complete rollercoaster of emotion. Even the last few days, there was so much hope for a ceasefire. Anybody you speak to here the last week, the last few months, every day, all they want to know is when there is a ceasefire coming. And it's what everybody has been hoping for. So to wake up yesterday morning to the devastating news that leaflets had been dropped and an evacuation order was in place, it really spread a lot of fear across the community. I'm currently in Western Rafah, but across Eastern Rafah, people started to move. But even outside my window, I was able to see people starting to take down their makeshift shelters, start to pack up and start to leave Rafah. There is a sense of fear and chaos now. Obviously, this is a minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour situation developing. But clearly, people are hearing the situation at the Rafah border crossing and now deciding to leave once again.
And tell us what the aid situation is like, because more aid had been getting in the past few weeks, hadn't it? What's the aid situation there now?
So there is now no aid entering the Gaza Strip. The Rafah crossing is the biggest and the only entry that UNRWA, the largest humanitarian agency here in Gaza, has been using. And now there is no aid able to get in. And in addition to that, there is also no fuel. So fuel is really what the agencies need to run this massive humanitarian operation across the Gaza Strip. Fuel is what's needed to run the trucks to get the aid to the people who need it. Fuel is needed in the generators to run the hospitals and health clinics that are remaining and not damaged and destroyed. So without this fuel and without these aid supplies, the aid operation here is simply going to ground to a halt.
What is the aid operation like at the moment?
We continue to do everything we can. Our colleagues are providing services. UNRWA runs health centres across the Gaza Strip. Even in North Gaza, we have some very heroic colleagues who have maintained running these health services throughout the war. So we do our best to provide these services and provide what aid we have. But it's very concerning to know that this border crossing is closed and that there is no foreseeable aid entering anytime soon.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. A British woman has pleaded guilty to being part of a global monkey torture network. 37-year-old Holly Legresley was a participant in a private online group that was paying people in Indonesia to kill and torture baby monkeys on video. Let's speak to our correspondent Rebecca Henschke, who's in Worcester, with more on this. Rebecca.
So Holly Legresley has pleaded guilty to being part of this global online monkey torture group. She went by the username The Emulator and was in a group on Telegram from people mainly from the UK and the US. They were brainstorming, crowdfunding, and then commissioning people in Indonesia to torture baby monkeys and then film it for them. In court today, we heard from the prosecutors who said that Holly Legresley showed a desire to harm vulnerable creatures and also had a hatred for pregnant women and children. She'll be sentenced at a later date.
OK, Rebecca, thank you. An Australian woman has formally pleaded not guilty to the murder of 3 relatives who allegedly died over mushroom poisoning at a family lunch last year. Erin Patterson is facing 3 murder charges and 5 counts of attempted murder. Police allege she tried to kill her ex-husband on 3 other occasions. Ms Patterson has always maintained her innocence. Our correspondent Katie Watson is following the trial.
Erin Patterson has always maintained her innocence, but this was the first time that her legal team said she would be pleading not guilty to all charges against her. Now, the charges relate to a lunch that she put on at her home in Leongatha, which is a town a few hours' drive from here in Melbourne. At that lunch, she served a beef Wellington with mushrooms, and attending that lunch were her in-laws, as well as her mother-in-law's sister and her husband too. Now, after that lunch, all of the guests fell ill, and 3 of them subsequently died. The 4th guest in Wilkinson, he was in a coma before recovering, but the police said that it was alleged that she fed them death cap mushrooms. Now, also invited to that lunch was her former husband, Simon Patterson. He did not attend. Now, the charges against her are 3 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder, and they also include previous alleged attempts against Simon Patterson's life. Now, also decided at the hearing was that the case will be fast-tracked to the Supreme Court. That means that a trial will come sooner rather than later, and the next hearing is expected in this court here in a few weeks' time.
Let's just take you live to France now. We're watching pictures there of President Xi's plane arriving in the Pyrenees. This is on the 2nd day of a state visit to France. Emmanuel Macron expected to welcome the Chinese president in the Pyrenees Mountains. We are waiting to see what will happen during this meeting, but they are expected to have a lunch in the mountains. And this is at the Tarbes-Lourdes Pyrenees Airport. Advisors to the French president have described this as breaking with protocol for a chance for one-on-one direct chat with President Xi. Apparently no aides will be there, so it will be far more personal. And we'll keep an eye on those pictures and any developments there. Now, personal information about serving members of the UK Armed Forces has been accessed from a system used by the Ministry of Defence. Government officials told the BBC that China was most likely responsible. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian has dismissed the accusation.
Relevant remarks of the UK politicians are absurd. China firmly opposes and fights all forms of cyber attacks. We also firmly reject using the cybersecurity issue politically to smear and vilify other countries.
With more on this, our political correspondent Alex Forsyth joins me now from Westminster. Hi, Alex. So what more do we know about this data breach?
Well, this data, the data that has been accessed, unauthorised access of this data breach, relates to serving military personnel across the RAF, the Army and the Navy, but also some veterans. And its access, the access to this information was held on a payroll system run by an external contractor. So we're not talking about the Ministry of Defence's main computers, and our understanding is no operational data has been compromised. The information that's been accessed is largely names and bank details of serving military personnel, and as I say, a few veterans, and in a very small number of cases, some addresses as well. Now, that external system has now been taken offline, and as you'd expect, the Ministry of Defence is investigating. They're also contacting all of the personnel who've been affected to offer them support and advice on what to do. And it's largely thought that, you know, the biggest risk here is not one of safety and security to the personnel, but potentially one of fraud, if anything. Now, in terms of who might be behind this, we're expecting a statement from the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps, who's going to update MPs in the House of Commons later today. And we don't expect that he's going to name China officially, but as you say, the suspicion in government is that China is behind this, and I suspect that when Grant Shapps appears in the House of Commons this afternoon, you're going to get a lot of questions from MPs about the government's assessment of who might be behind this, but of course also the much wider security risk that might pose.
Yeah, Alex, we were just looking at pictures of President Xi arriving in France a moment ago, and it's a problem that many Western nations face, isn't it? How do they deal with a country that they have huge trade with, very important economically, but also that in many ways they see as a threat?
Completely, and it's been a very active conversation, not least within the Conservative Party, which I suspect may bubble up again during the course of this afternoon, because there are some Conservative MPs that want the government to take a much firmer line when it comes to its approach to China and to expressly say that they perceive China as a threat. Now, the government hasn't done that. It's talked about much rather its wider relationship with China and being alive, of course, to the actions of China, but also being mindful of that economic relationship and trading relationship, as you say. But I think this incident, although the government isn't going to officially name China as being behind this, because it can take a very long period of time to gather enough information for a government to make such a statement when it comes to the actors behind any suspected attack as this one. So despite the fact they're not going to name China expressly, I think that's very much going to be the centre of conversation among Conservative MPs and within the party, because there is an active discussion about whether the government is taking the right approach to China, with some MPs suggesting they should be much firmer.
OK, Alex, for now, thank you. Now let's take you to New York, where the biggest night of the fashion year has come to a close. Guests at the Met Gala put on a show reflective of this year's theme, the Garden of Time. Flowers in every colour and shape have appeared on the green carpet for this year's event. A-list celebrities like Zendaya, Jennifer Lopez, Bad Bunny and Chris Hemsworth have joined Vogue editor Anna Wintour as hosts of the gala. Well, Paige Skinner, associate reporter for the Huffington Post, told us more about who stood out.
Yeah, this was full of A-list celebrities and really great fashion. But for me, who stood out was Tyla. She was wearing a beautiful balmain gown, completely made out of sand, and it fit her so perfectly. She actually couldn't walk up the steps. She had to be lifted for each step. She was a real standout for me. And of course, Kendall Jenner, who is wearing Givenchy, she always looks great at every red carpet event. It was a spectacular night for fashion. The dress code was Garden of Time. So of course, a lot of celebrities and designers were going to take that and probably wear some florals. That clip from The Devil Wears Prada has definitely been going around tonight on social media. But, you know, I think it was a cool theme, and designers could kind of take a lot of leeway with it, and we saw that with the balmain dress that Tyla wore. She kind of nodded more to the time aspect of it.
Fantastic frocks there. Now, just before we go, let's head back to France and this airport in the Pyrenees, where a plane carrying the Chinese President Xi Jinping has just landed, and President Macron has arrived to greet his guest of honour for the second day of his state visit. Well, one of Macron's main objectives, we understand, for this visit is to try to convince President Xi to reduce the trade imbalance between the two regions, with better access for European firms in China and less subsidies for Chinese exports. They are about to head for an intimate tete-a-tete, a lunch there, we understand, without lots of their aides in tow. Well, yesterday, on day one of the state visit, the Chinese and French released a joint statement saying they'd reached interdepartmental agreements on several areas, including AI, the Middle East and agriculture, and that Airbus is in talks with China over a potentially major aircraft order. Well, this deal visit very important for both countries. It's the Chinese Premier's first visit to Europe in 5 years. We'll continue to keep an eye on that and bring you the latest. Stay with us here on BBC News.
Hello, at long last, a little bit of welcome news in the forecast for the rest of this week after what has been a particularly wet spell for some southern and eastern areas. The Isle of Portland in Dorset have already exceeded our main rainfall in the first 7 days. Contrast that with Kinloss and the Murray Coast, where we've not seen a drop of rain recorded yet. We'll switch things around a little bit through this week, and where we need a bit of rain, the north and west of Scotland, there will be some at times. Still some dry weather here and warm with the sunshine out later, but where we've seen the wettest conditions, a largely dry picture, only isolated showers and feeling warm as the sunshine develops more widely. And even today, an improving picture. The weather front, which brought the rain in the southeast, is cleared through. One weather front, though, still tangled in across parts of Scotland, producing lots of cloud and a few spots of light rain or drizzle. A few light showers possible across western England and Wales, but nowhere near as many or as widespread as yesterday, or indeed as heavy. And it does mean that more of you will spend the bulk of the day dry, if not the complete day dry. And temperatures responding into the high teens, if not low 20s. Always cooler where that thicker cloud is in parts of Scotland. That'll be there tonight. Fairly cloudy in Northern Ireland too for a while. A few mist and fog patches possible, but low cloud and sea fog will lap into eastern parts of England and around western coast of Wales, north coast of Devon and Cornwall too, to make for a murky start tomorrow. But temperatures fairly similar to this morning. Now, as we go into Wednesday, middle part of the week, that high pressure, which is going to bring the dry conditions, becomes more established to the south and east. Weather fronts, though, scooting round that just to the north and west, which is going to bring some rain later on across the Western Isles, northern and western Scotland, and into the evening, maybe across some parts of Northern Ireland. On the odd isolated shower across some western areas, most places, though, having a dry day on Wednesday, and with a little bit more sunshine around after that murky start. Temperatures will be more widely high teens and low 20s. As you go through into Thursday, overnight patchy rain or drizzle, Northern Ireland clears. Still a bit damp in the far north of Scotland. Many they'll have a dry day. Very few, if any, showers around at all for most of you, and a lot more sunshine. So we could see temperatures by this stage 22 or 23 and creeping into the low 20s in parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland too. And they will climb further as we go through towards the end of the week and into the start of the weekend, with most dry until we see some showers develop on Sunday. Take care.
I used to work the whole day when I was pregnant. I wouldn't take much rest. I remember being thirsty all the time and out of breath.
Acabamos de llegar al lugar donde va a comenzar la búsqueda del migrante desaparecido.
So from where we're at right now, we can see from left to right and right to left, a heavily wooded area denotes the border between North and South Korea. There are no fences, there are no barriers, and there are no walls that separate North and South.
زنایی که فقط باید سکوت کنن، هیچ کس نباید صدایشان رو بشنوه، صدای گپشان رو بشنوه. ما تصمیم گرفتیم که در اونجا باید صدامون رو به شکل آهنگ بیرون کنیم.
Just because we've got a disability doesn't mean that we are children. We are adults with hopes and dreams. Without sports, none of us would be here.
Inspiring short films from the BBC. Watch now on iPlayer.
Be ready. Change can happen in an instant. Check on the BBC Weather app.
More turbulence for Boeing as it faces another safety investigation in the US, this time over the 787 Dreamliner. And oil profits are down. Two giants of the industry, BP and Saudi Aramco, report a fall in revenue amid lower oil prices. Hello, welcome to the programme. This is World Business Report. I'm Ben Thompson, and we begin this programme in the United States, where the troubles facing Boeing have become even more serious. The US air safety regulator has opened a new investigation into the aircraft maker after Boeing acknowledged that it may not have carried out proper quality inspections on its 787 Dreamliner. Well, that follows another probe earlier this year into the safety of its 737 MAX planes, one of which suffered a mid-flight incident when a part of a wall of the plane blew out. From New York, the BBC's Michelle Fleury has the details.
Boeing's work is once again in the spotlight. America's air safety regulator, the Federal Aviation Authority, has opened a new investigation into Boeing after the company came forward and said some employees had committed misconduct by claiming certain tests had been completed when in fact they hadn't. Now, the FAA is investigating whether Boeing completed inspections to confirm adequate bonding and grounding where the wings joined the main body of the plane on certain 787 Dreamliner aircraft. Bonding and grounding is vital on a plane because it prevents static build-up. Think of it as electrical safeguards. Boeing credited a South Carolina worker who saw something they felt was wrong on the production line and came forward and reported it. Cutting corners at work is something that many of us may have been guilty of at various times in our lives. But given the frequency with which quality control issues keep coming up at Boeing, the airline has a long way to go to regain the trust of the flying public, its customers, the airlines, as well as lawmakers.
Let's just take you to France, where the Chinese President Xi Jinping is meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron. Now, they're in Tarbes-Lourdes, it's the Pyrenees airport, and a slight break in normal protocol. What's happening is that President Macron is taking President Xi to the birthplace of his grandmother. And he's doing so, his advisors say, because they can have direct one-on-one chats away from perhaps some of the scrutiny of a more formal visit. Now, we understand one of the main objectives of this visit is to try to ease tensions between the West and China, and it's a difficult relationship, one that is largely dominated by trade. So many countries around the world relying on China as the workshop of the world, and also particularly, of course, for its tech exports. But there have been growing tensions on a number of serious geopolitical issues, and it all revolves around trade too, the trade imbalance between the two countries. What President Macron is hoping for is a better deal for European, but notably French firms dealing with China. And President Xi keen, of course, to reiterate the importance of the bilateral links between the two countries. So some of the formalities here before the two men then make their way away from the sight of cameras to begin those talks. So an important moment as the two men meet. It's the second day of President Xi's trip, but so far very little by way of big announcements. There's been no news on new economic policies or new trade deals between the two, but one of the main objectives here is to try and reduce the trade imbalance between China and European firms. We'll keep you right up to date with any developments that emerge from those talks. But I just want to return to our top story, that news that there is a further safety investigation into Boeing. Let's talk now to the business leadership expert, Chris Roebuck. He's from UCL School of Management. And Chris, just Michelle was explaining some of the latest issues here for Boeing. It's really serious, this, isn't it?
Ben, I don't know. I'm laughing. I don't know what to say. Well, something happens at Boeing, and you just think. I mean, this has been going on for 6 years now. You just think it can't get any worse, but they've managed to come up with something that is worse. The fact that records might have been altered on the process recording of quality for aeroplanes, the 787, is mind-blowingly worrying. Now, Boeing say, okay, we've checked all the ones on the production line. Yeah, but what about the ones that have left the production line and are out there? It's just so many leadership and culture failures over the last 6 years have created so many really, really stunning safety problems.
If this was any other industry as well, a firm would be seriously looking at its viability given the pretty disastrous issues that have unfolded. But the industry can't afford to let Boeing fail, can it? It's Airbus, Boeing and a couple of other players. It's a dominant it's a market in which it is so dominant it can't afford to fail.
You're right. I mean, in terms of aircraft suppliers, it is a limited market with a limited number of suppliers. But also the problem is it is a safety critical industry. You want to make sure that the plane you're sitting on doesn't have loose bolts or wings that haven't been stuck together properly, or where the Boeing workers were jumping up and down to make sure they fitted. So somebody needs to get a grip of this. And it looks like, obviously, the FAA are involved, the US government are involved, but all the time we keep getting Boeing saying, don't worry, nothing to see here, we've got it under control. The problem is that Boeing started reducing their focus on quality about 20 years ago. And fundamentally, the message that has come down from the company's leadership to the employees over that period in time, they say safety is the most important to the public. But in reality, it's get the planes out as fast as possible, get the money in as fast as possible. And if it's safe, okay, so be it, which is not a way that ethical and leaders with integrity in the aircraft industry should be demonstrating an example.
Chris, we'll talk about this again. There's a lot for us to fit in this show, but grateful for your time this morning. Thank you, Chris Roebuck, there with the latest on what's happening at Boeing. I want to turn our attention, though, now to oil, because two giants of the industry, BP and Saudi Aramco, have released their latest quarterly results. They show a fall in profits as lower oil prices affect revenue. BP's numbers, while they're down 45% in the first quarter compared to the same time last year. Underlying replacement cost profit, as it's called, was $2.7 billion compared to $4.9 billion this time last year. Well, Saudi Arabia's state oil company Saudi Aramco, for its part, saw profits down by 14% compared to last year. Both Saudi Aramco and BP posted record profits this time last year. So what does it tell us about what's going on? Let's talk to our business editor, Simon Jack. And Simon, what does it tell us about the industry?
It tells us that we are coming out of the back end of the energy crisis that was sparked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which saw Russian oil and gas supplies either shut off or shunned by many markets, which sent prices rocketing. So we're coming down from there. So I think it's very unlikely that the likes of BP will ever make as much money as they did during that 2022-2023 period. But what is interesting about the BP numbers, down 45% on lower oil and gas profits, they slightly missed the estimates that people said of what they were expecting them to make in profits, whereas Shell, similar company profile, actually exceeded their estimates. And this is down to the fact that Shell has been unapologetically going hell for leather for more oil and gas production. And BP has been less aggressive in that way, saying it's trying to stick to its transition plans. Both have weakened them a little bit, but there is some tension between BP and Shell shareholders, saying some of them would like the BP strategy to be a bit more like Shell. So we'll see where that goes.
All right, we will. Simon, good to talk to you. Thank you, our business editor, Simon Jack there. Thanks. Now in the UK, the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who is hoping to take over as Finance Minister at this year's general election, has been giving a speech in which she accuses the government of gaslighting the British people over the state of the economy. Speaking to a room full of business leaders, she said that the government's claims that their economic plan is working are deluded.
They say we've turned a corner, but try telling that to the 6.4 million households across England and Wales last year who saw their rent increase or who had to remortgage. Or the 950,000 families whose mortgage deal is due to expire between now and January next year. They say the plan is working. Is this the same plan that has meant that this is forecast to be the first Parliament on record with living standards at the end lower than they were at the start?
Well, that speech comes ahead of key figures that are likely to show the UK emerge from recession. They'll be out later this week. The Bank of England could also start taking steps to cut interest rates. So what does it tell us? Let's talk to Mike Coop from Morningstar Investment Management. Mike, good to have you with us. So Rachel Reeve's pretty critical there of the government's handling of the economy. They are in pre-election mode, though, aren't they?
So, as with any discussion on the economy, it's worthwhile separating out the things that are within the control of the politicians from those that will happen anyway. So I think when we talk about the conditions and what's going to happen, we should be humble about recognizing that there's always shocks that happen. And the state of the play now is actually quite surprising from what people were already expecting. So the comments that were being made about inflation and about growth are really a response to the narrative put forward by the government. And in this, we have to be clear that many of the things being talked about were going to happen anyway. So the inflation dropping was pretty predictable as the impact of the Russian war waned on the price of gas, and that flows through into the cost of heating our homes and the economy. The same thing on growth. We had a big increase in interest rates because of the inflation shock. That's having an effect on weakening growth. And that's actually been a better outcome than people were expecting a year ago when people were forecasting recession. So that's just a backdrop. I think it's worthwhile bearing in mind when you think about what will happen going forward and the difference between who's in office.
Yeah, and Mike, briefly for us, the government will probably be cursing the timing of all of this because they've got to have an election before January of next year. But actually, if they had a little bit longer, we might start to feel better off as interest rates come down, inflation starts to ease. But it might be that we're still feeling worse off at the election.
So the underlying drivers haven't really changed of the economy, even though that big surge in inflation has come off. We still are going to continue to have interest rates higher than we used to. And the government choices are hemmed in by a large amount of debt, deficits, high taxes, and so on. So I think in terms of thinking about this going forward, you know, the real issue is probably going to be whatever administration there is, how they deal with the global shifts around AI, regional trading, decarbonisation. But for assets and for people who own assets in the UK, it's also a case of whether there'll be more certainty of policy and whether that will actually benefit UK assets because there won't be as much of a risk premium for uncertainty.
Really good to talk to you, Mike. Thanks very much, Mike Coop there, Morningstar Investment Management. Now, before we go, some news about us. After more than 30 years, we're going to say goodbye to World Business Report. Well, it's had quite a few different looks over the years. This one from the late 1990s, well, WBR as we call it, it looked like, well, this until 2007, when a new look arrived and everything went quite blue. And then came our spiky globe in 2013. We love it. But it's time for a new look and a new name. Business Today is what will be called from later today. All you need to know about money, markets, finance, tech, travel and trade. Business Today here on BBC News. But for one final time, from me and the team, you've been watching World Business Report. Bye-bye.
Ready for a lively debate? Sometimes our panellists agree, and sometimes they don't. There's people with a lot to say, and others who just say enough. Some who want to ask the hard questions, some who want to avoid them, and some who think they have the answers. They're guaranteed to keep you entertained, whether you agree or not. Politics Live, today at 12:15 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
Hello from the BBC Sports Centre, I'm Tanya Arnold. Erik ten Hag insists he's the right man to turn around the fortunes of Manchester United despite watching his side get thrashed 4-0 by Crystal Palace in the Premier League. The result leaves them 8th and in danger of missing out on European competition next